Hello and welcome to the industry webinar for Project 2021-07, Extreme Cold Weather Grid Operations, Preparedness, and Coordination. I am Allison Oswald, the NERC standards developer on this project. Today I'm joined by members of the drafting team for this presentation. First, we will start with some administrative items, and then we will review the standard revisions for EOP 12-2 for this posting and the implementation plan. We will end by discussing the next steps along with having a question and answer session. It is NERC's policy and practice to obey the antitrust laws and to avoid all conduct that unreasonably restrains competition. This policy requires the avoidance of any conduct that violates or that might appear to violate the antitrust laws. Among other things, the antitrust laws forbid any agreement between or among competitors regarding prices, availability of service, product design, terms of sale, division of markets, allocation of customers, or any other activity that unreasonably restrains competition. It is the responsibility of every NERC participant and employee who may in any way affect NERC's compliance with the antitrust laws to carry out this commitment. Participants are reminded that this meeting is public. Notice of the meeting was widely distributed. Participants should keep in mind that the audience may include members of the press and representatives of various governmental authorities, in addition to the expected participation by industry stakeholders. I'll now turn it over to Kenny Lubert, who is the chair of this project.
Thanks, Allison. I want to start by thanking the drafting team. So if you look at the names of the people on this slide here, you'll see that's a broad cross-section from industry, both in geographic locations and the functions they serve. So we had an excellent drafting team. They've served for 2 years, approximately 20 ballots that we've done, 3 new standards that we're rolling out as part of this drafting team, and literally thousands and thousands of industry comments that we've answered. So I couldn't be more proud of the work they've done, and the entire time they were doing it, we've had no real dissension or any problems among the drafting team. Everybody has worked together and tried to genuinely put out the best product that we can possibly do as a team. So I can't thank them enough, and I want to say special thanks to Matt, who's not on the call today. Even after taking a new job responsibility, he's continued to serve, and special thanks to Matt and Allison. Next slide, please. So on the last ballot, we received approximately 59% approval, which was up from, I think, around 43, 44% on the initial ballot. So pretty significant improvement on the changes that we made. And on the key concerns that we still had left to address were really around 5 key issues. One is we reference good utility practice in the FERC oath. And it's certainly a common term, but you know, a lot of the language goes back to that oath. And there was a certain thought that if that changed at some point, that it would be outside of this standard that we're putting out. So we took that language and we self-contained it in the constraint. And then we also refined it to really be honed around extreme cold weather and the practices you would do on freeze protection measures specific to extreme cold weather. So we really improved the definition also for our needs. So that was probably the largest concern we addressed, and certainly the one that led to the most negative votes. The next concern was there was stagger language that was put in to try to speed up the process of getting these freeze protection measures in. But with the abbreviated schedule and the approach we've done on caps, the stagger language really didn't add any reliability benefit. And it was perceived that it could add administrative burden without having that corresponding reliability benefit. So we just removed it. There's a lot of natural staggering that will occur in the industry around people and outages. So this will happen without the language, and adding the language really doesn't add value. The next thing we reviewed was the annual review around cold weather constraints. In general, these should be rare, and where you take a cold weather constraint for freeze protection measures, it's not going to be an issue that's going to change year over year. It's going to be something that's going to take longer to address. So that annual review was viewed as administrative without adding a lot of value. So we moved that out to a 5-year review. And the last thing was just there was concern among a lot of northern utilities and northern units that in Winter Storm Uri, they really didn't see a loss of reliability, and yet they're going to have new standards on them as well. I will say Winter Storm Elliott does highlight that northern utilities can have issues too. But I'll address this one in more detail on the next slide. So specific to northern utilities and all utilities, I want to address the concern that, EOP 12.2 may be overly administrative, because I don't think that that's the case. So the first thing you have to do is calculate your ECWT. This is fairly straightforward. We've developed a guide to help. Most of the industry has already done this, I believe. So I don't think that that's administrative, calculating that one temperature. And then document your generating unit operating limitations. Certainly that's something you'll want to have anyhow for your own benefit. And, the documentation called for in the standards is not onerous or excessive. Know what unit minimum temperature you can run to reliably. Once again, I feel like that's a number you should want to have for your own benefits, and the documentation we call for is not onerous. And you can use historical operating data. So to the extent you can show that you've historically operated under your ECWT, that will show that you can meet these standards. And then you just document the freeze protection measures that you have in place on your critical components, which is the next item. So while I understand this is, documentation, it's all good documentation that will, be good for the plant to have on its own merits anyhow. And I will say on the freeze protection measures, that's already in EOP 11. So that is already a requirement with existing standards. And maintain a cold weather plan. That is already in EOP 11. That's already been approved, and it's an existing requirement. So both of those are good practices, and they're already existing requirements. So to the extent you approve this new standard, you're not adding more on, you're just updating that to the latest language. Unit-specific cold weather training, once again, that's stuff that's already largely done and already in EOP 11. So, and then finally, we have the corrective action plans for any generated cold weather reliability events. And this is a new requirement with the EOP 12, but it is also industry best practice and something that I view, good utilities are already doing. So to the extent you do it for the standard, it's just best practices. So I don't view the standards as overly administrative. It's taking good utility practice and just putting some, structure around it such that, we can uniformly do it across the industry. I'll have Dave Dearman will dive in on more of the details of the changes on the next slides. Thank you.
Thank you, Kenny. Hope everyone can hear me okay. And I do appreciate Kenny's and Matt's leadership on the standard drafting team. They've done an excellent job. So let me start off, I guess, briefly here with kind of a review of the FERC directive, which happened after EOP 12 was approved back in late 23. But FERC had a number of directives they wanted the standard drafting team to address, and one was associated with the constraint declarations. And so I wanted to kind of remind the group here of what those were. And one of the phrases there you'll see is that they wanted to ensure that the constraint declarations may not be used to opt out. And so from that, the standard drafting team felt like there were some obviously valid situations where constraint declarations would be needed, and our challenge was to adequately define what would be a valid constraint. So that's been our attempt here through several iterations to do that. And so I think there may be three main points here that this directive wanted us to address. One was to make sure there wasn't any ambiguity of defined constraints. And the second was to make sure that there were criteria for permissible constraints. And the third I've kind of taken out of here was that, identify which entity would receive those constraint declarations. and the standard drafting team believes that already existed in the NERC standards TOP 003 and IRO 10, which provides the RCs and BAs and TOPs to make a data request from the GOs. And so that is essentially already existing in the NERC standards we have today. So with that, let's move to the next slide, please. So you can see the text of the previous constraint, generator cold weather constraint that we have that we had in the previous ballot. We're going to replace that with the text that you see in red. Kenny has already mentioned that one of the comments or several of the comments were related to having the definition self-contained in the standard and align with the NERC rules of procedure. And so that was just an oversight of our team in the last posting. And so hopefully now we have corrected that by proposing this definition here that we feel is adequate to provide clarity and sufficient detail to meet the FERC directive. So we replaced the phrase good utility practice that was the predominant focus of the previous definition, and tried to elaborate on that to the extent we believe it's adequate, and this slide as well as some text on the next slide will show that. So an example here in the red, I'll just read that briefly. Any condition that would preclude a generator owner from implementing freeze protection measures on one or more generator cold weather critical components using the criteria below, and the criteria below will be shown on the next page. The freeze protection measures are not intended for everybody to go to the optimal practice methods or technologies, but rather be acceptable practices that have been implemented, the methods and technologies generally implemented by the electric industry in areas of similar winter climate conditions. And so we feel like the phrase there, similar weather climate conditions, is adequate because there are different technologies in different areas. There's different freeze protection measures used in different areas of the country. And so we wanted this definition to be very, very reasonable, but yet definitive enough to have the desired result of increased reliability. So with that, I'll move to the next slide. So this is a continuation of the definition, and the criteria bulleted here is to be used to help the GO understand what would be a valid constraint and maybe what would not. So I guess I'll just touch on a couple of things here. That if freeze protection measures are not broadly implemented, then there are a lot of testing and trials going on out there of different technologies, but in order for this to have a reasonable assurance of effectiveness, the standard drafting team felt like there needs to be more, broadly implemented so that it's proven technology that others could see that would work. If there's some proposal out there, if it's not expected to adequately accomplish the desired result, then that would be a valid reason for a constraint. Or if there was unreasonable cost consistent with good business practices, or it might impact reliability or safety in some manner, then those could be items that could be justified by the GO of maybe not fully implementing the freeze protection measures outlined in the standard. So some of the text here was taken from what was previously defined as good utility practice we had used, and tried to expand on that in a little bit more detail But the challenge for the drafting team was to find strong enough language to get the desired result, but yet not not to cause unintended consequences for the GO of maybe reduced capacity in the summer or early retirements of units would be another example. So let's move to the next slide. And so here's the items we listed in the technical rationale, which did not change from the last posting, that are examples of what could be legitimate constraints based on the criteria in the red text on the previous slide. So the intent is for these cold weather constraints to be limited and be the exception and not the rule. And so generator cold weather constraints need to be well documented by the GO and show the justification based on the criteria in these previous slides that a constraint indeed is warranted. Okay, let's move to the next slide. I want to speak just a minute on requirement 8, which talks about the constraint declarations. You can see here what we have struck out from the previous version, where we had an annual review based on feedback and comments from the last posting. The standard drafting team considered that and felt like that an annual review may be a little too frequent because the technologies and criteria that would change, or the potential for someone to remove a constraint would probably not change that often. And so we elected to change the annual review to a once at least once every 5 calendar years, or if there is a change in status of that constraint, that the generator should then look at what they've declared and review that. And if there are any changes that would need updating, then requirement 8.2 would take care of that for that constraint to be updated and be made available upon request. Let's see if there's one thing here I wanted to mention. All right, so let me just, before we go to the next slide, let me mention one thing here that kind of ties into constraints that the standard drafting team discussed and was mentioned. The recent NERC level 3 alert that was issued last year did provide some information, but a more formal request is probably in the future. And so the results of that level 3 that was reported by NERC in their December 12th document showed that 96% of the GOs, I guess, that submitted had already calculated or expected to calculate their ECWT, and that 90+% of the capacity said they would be capable of operating at their ECWT. And most entities that said they were not were of the wind farm technology. So the standard drafting team wants to, first of all, thank the industry. I think there's been progress made already on winterization, and this summary of this level 3 alert is encouraging, and it just reinforces our belief that these constraint declarations would be the exception and few in number. Okay, next slide. You've seen this before in previous webinars. It's just really a visual of the constraint declaration and the corrective action plan process. We did update in the orange box there at the bottom right-hand corner, the 5-year review instead of the 1-year review. So hopefully this will help provide clarity on the steps that are needed to meet the intent of the standard. I think that's all I wanted to share at this point. I'm sure there might be some questions later, but at this point, I'll turn the webinar over to Brad Pabian, which will discuss corrective action plans.
All right, thanks, David, and thank you, Kenny and Allison, for the introduction as well on the webinar. I'm going to take just a few minutes today to talk about the corrective action plan portion of EOP 12.2. There were some changes made in the version that's out for ballot currently. So we'll start with just kind of a review of when corrective action plans are required under this standard. There's 4 requirements, requirement 1, 2, 3, and 6 within the standard that would require an entity to prepare and implement a corrective action plan due to various forms of freeze protection issues. So any requirement 1 would potentially require some measures associated with a 5-year review of the extreme cold weather temperature. Requirements 2 and 3 address the requirements for new generating facilities and existing generating facilities respectively. And requirement 6 would require an entity to prepare corrective action plans, potentially following a freeze protection issue that causes a generator cold weather reliability event, and that's a defined term within the standard. As Kenny mentioned at the beginning of the webinar today, there was quite a bit of feedback from industry on the latest ballot relative to the FERC directive to stagger implementation of corrective action plans, particularly when they involve multiple units. And so what we have done with this version of the ballot is that requirement is removed from requirement 7. It's removed from the standard in total, with the philosophy being that corrective action plans that affect multiple units will naturally be staggered in their implementation, just simply based on outage timing, budget timing, engineering and construction procurement, so forth and so on. And along with that, the timetable requirements for corrective action plan that were included in the previous ballot version under section 7.1.1 and 7.1.2 provide some level of certainty in that the effects of these corrective action plans will be effective and will take effect in a timely manner. So those 2 sections, if we can move to the next slide, 7.1.1 and 7.1.2, define the maximum tie line that's allowed for implementation of the corrective actions, and those are not changed from the previous version. So essentially, repairs to existing corrective action, or repairs to existing freeze protection measures must be completed within 24 months, and any new freeze protection measures must be completed within 48 months. Finally, a provision still remains in the standard for a generator owner to declare a generator cold weather constraint. David just spent a few minutes talking about that. And so that provision does still exist for a generator owner that has an issue that precludes implementation of those freeze protection measures. And so requirement 7.4 is shown here on the screen, and we've made a slight edit here in which the generator owner would put into a declaration justifying that constraint and defining the specific actions which are precluded, specific actions in the corrective action plan which are precluded from being completed. So I believe with that, I'll turn it over to Kenny for the implementation plan.
Thank you very much, David and Brad. I'll start with the FERC directive. After EOP 12.1 passed, they directed us to require a shorter implementation period and staggered implementation. And we've discussed about the staggered quite a bit. I think it's important to understand what was in EOP 12.1 on the implementation plan. It originally had a 5-year timeline for new units and existing units to meet their ECWT or come up with a corrective action plan. And those corrective action plans did not have any timeline. So it potentially was quite a bit longer than what we have in the current standard. The current standard has, and let's just go to the next slide, please, Allison. The current standard has all of the requirements except for the existing unit requirement effective 10/1/2024. So that's much abbreviated from a 5-year timeline. And some of the requirements in there were 18 months in the existing, in the EOP 12.1. But certainly for new units, that's a lot abbreviated from 5 years. And then on the existing units, it moved up to 10/1/2025. So rather than stagger, we chose to just slide the entire implementation timeframe forward. We agreed with FERC on a lot of this work had previously been done, and we think the industry was really motivated to make sure that we're meeting extreme cold weather. So we thought these timelines were appropriate. Upon balloting, we received broad approval of these timelines. So in general, industry agreed with these abbreviated or faster timelines. And as such, we have not changed them on the current ballot. So they were broadly approved on the previous one. And we think that that aggressive schedule is warranted by the reliability concerns we're addressing. Next slide, please. And this graphic captures that. And, we're sitting in January of 2024. So certainly having the entire standard, become effective 10/1/2024 does not seem like a long time at all. And then having the existing unit requirements due a year after that certainly seems pretty aggressive as well. So we think we are aggressively tackling the concerns around extreme cold weather. And then we list the corrective action plan timelines off to the right and bottom of that slide. So I think the implementation plan meets the FERC directive and certainly addresses the reliability concerns that I know everybody wants to address. Thank you. And Allison, I think you have it from here.
Thank you, Kenny, and all the members of the drafting team who participated in this webinar today. So this is the third posting for EOP 12-2. This posting includes a clean red line to last posted and red line to last approved version of the standard, as well as a clean and red line implementation plan. To support this posting, the team has included a technical rationale document for EOP 12 and a mapping document to easily identify where in the standard changes were made based on the report and the February FERC order. The posting runs from January 22nd. Sorry, the posting runs from yesterday, January 10th, until January 22nd. The ballot will be open from January 16th to January 22nd. This will be the last posting of the project under the usual standards process manual process. The NERC board intends to invoke the ROP provision 321 if this ballot does not pass. The link to the board announcement on this is included in the webinar if you'd like to read more. So if this posting does pass industry and gets approval, the team is targeting final ballot in February of 2024, likely the week of February 5th, to meet the FERC deadline of February 16th. This webinar is being recorded and it will be posted in about 48 hours. If you have any questions on the project or the webinar, please feel free to contact me. My email is included and my phone number is listed on the slide. Next, we'll be having an informal question and answer session. As a reminder, this posting is only for EOP 12-2. So let's focus our questions on that and the changes made from the drafting team. Additionally, questions regarding compliance with existing reliability standards should be directed to ERO compliance staff, not the drafting team. So please use the Q&A function of WebEx to send your questions in, not the chat function. And I will read them aloud for the team to answer once I start seeing some questions come through. Okay, the first question we received regarding requirement 8.1, please explain more about what a change of status is. Does it include experiencing a generator cold weather reliability event?
I think I can take that and maybe Brad or David can add on if I don't fully cover it. Certainly, generator cold weather reliability event, if you have one in the winter and it has you look at the same freeze protection measures you had previously taken a declaration on, and conditions have changed such that, you know, you may no longer be warranted in taking that declaration, that would be a change of status. So certainly that would potentially drive a change of status of that declaration. I also think it could be driven by conditions outside of that. For instance, if you were planning to retire a unit 2 years from now and for reliability concerns, you move that back to 7 years. You may want to look at any declarations you had taken for not implementing freeze protection measures and see if they're still appropriate. So I don't think it's the only thing that can drive a change of status, but certainly it's the most likely thing to drive a change of status. I don't know, Brad or David, anything to add to that?
I don't have anything more. Kenny, thank you.
This is David, I'll quickly add, potentially another example of maybe the cost of implementing a certain technology. Maybe that cost changes. So what was once deemed unreasonable now maybe is not in future years for some reason. So that could be another example of how things would change.
Okay, thank you. If you're having a hard time getting Q&A in WebEx, please click on the 3 dots on the bottom right of your WebEx screen. It's panel options. You'll be able to add the Q&A section to your layout so that you can send your questions in that way. We'll only be responding to questions received through Q&A, not chat. Okay, our next question. For EOP 12-2, if an entity has an ECWT that is above 32 degrees, does the entity only have an obligation to calculate the ECWT on a 5-year basis?
I can take the first shot at that, Allison, and if others want to weigh in, please do. That is not correct. As part of the FERC directive, we were directed to ensure that EOP 12 largely applied to all GOs, whether your ECWT is above 32 or below. So you will have to calculate the ECWT, you will have to have a cold weather plan, and you will have to perform training on that cold weather plan. Now, that cold weather plan may envision scenarios where you could drop below 32 and, kind of have a what if scenario in there. And, certainly it wouldn't be as extensive as somebody that regularly experienced really cold temperatures, but those obligations exist for all GOs and, that the standard applies to.
Thank you, Kenny. Next question. What are the requirements for the constraint declarations to inform system operators and planners?
There's not a specific, I'll take that and others add in, please. There's not a specific requirement for the GOs to inform. Existing standards provided a means for parties that would like that information to GOs can do data request and get it. We don't think other parties are going to be as interested in the exact constraints that a GO would take as they will be on the unit limitations that are driven by those constraints. So we believe that's the information that will really be of value to other parties, is what can that unit reliably do in extreme cold weather? And the declaration itself, we think may be informative, and certainly reliability entities will want to dig into that. But we think the parties outside of the GO are going to be interested more in the unit limitations of that generating unit. Other drafting team members, anything you want to weigh in on that?
Okay, I'll move on to the next question then. For the generator cold weather constraint definition, please explain the meaning of the criterion practices, methods, or technologies which could not have been expected to accomplish the desired result. I'm confused about how such a thing would be in a cap. Why would you ever consider implementing something that doesn't do what you need to do?
Agreed. So to the extent, you identify some kind of freeze protection measure, and we don't have great examples of this, that others have done in the industry, maybe around, some kind of inlet, protection for extreme, heavy snows or something. But when you look at your specific instance, you say, hey, we understand that others have had, or, have done something like this, or, EPRI's done some kind of study on it, and it's a potential. But when we investigate that specific freeze protection measure for the incident that we are experiencing, we have identified that it will not work. It will not solve the problem. And as such, you would never want to, spend money that somebody has to pay for in rates to put in a freeze protection measures that won't solve the problem. So it envisions a scenario where somebody's identified something in the industry that might work. You've looked at it, and for your specific unit, it will not work. And as such, you would list that in your declaration. So that's the scenario we're envisioning. David Dearman, you've been really close to this one. Anything to add to that?
No, Kenny, I think you adequately did that, and to have that phrase in the text is really it's more of an option than it is more constraining. So I don't see that as really a negative to have that phrase there.
All right, thank you both. We just got another question. Referring to the flow chart for each generator cold weather constraint declaration process, once a declaration is created, is it intended to keep the cap open indefinitely until it could be closed? For example, during the 5-year review of the constraint, or close it out referencing the constraint? I'll try to get to that flow chart real quick to help us. Here we go.
Sometimes you get a question that you didn't talk about at length in the drafting team, and this is one of them. My view is that the cap and the declaration would both live independently, as such that you could, close out the cap, the rest of the cap, and keep the declaration open on the side. But I certainly like to hear what David Dearman thinks on that. But you'll certainly have to track both the cap and the declaration.
Yeah, you're right, Kenny. We didn't spend much time in that level of detail, but I think that is a correct answer. The constraint declaration, as long as it was valid, would continue to live and be available to the entities that ask for it. And if you've done all you can in your cap, and you've got a valid reason not to do any more, then that cap would close out. If something changes, as we've already discussed, and the situation is different, then maybe you have to create another cap to say, okay, I've now identified I can implement this for whatever reason, and here's my new timeline for whatever event caused a change in that declaration. Hopefully that's sufficient.
Thank you both. Next question, regarding generator cold weather constraint definition, one of the criteria is on cost. How will auditors determine what is reasonable cost?
Allison, that gets into a little bit of how this is going to be enforced. I don't know if I want to go into great detail. I don't know if NERC wants to on this call. But certainly the GOs would have to provide documentation demonstrating why they think it's not a reasonable cost. And I would expect that the auditors would review that documentation, and there would be a discussion that happens as part of that review.
Thank you, Kenny. Next one, as a system operator, I would be concerned if there are critically located units which do not have freeze protection meeting ECWT and would want to know if they need to be derated. Is the SDT considering some recommendations to require this be done?
I'll respond to that. So the current requirements require you to, have an ECWT. They require you to provide your generating unit minimum temperature. So you'll be showing whether that unit can meet that ECWT with documentation supporting that. And they require you to, keep track of any unit limitations. So as a system operator, I'm thinking of a BA. To the extent you want all that information from a entity as part of the TOP requirements, you can provide a data request and get that information. So I would certainly recommend that you do that.
Okay, next question. Is it possible to identify generator cold weather critical components if your ECWT is above 32 degrees?
It's possible to identify components that could potentially have freeze protection issues if the temperature were to drop below 32. To the extent your ECWT is above 32, there would be no requirement to put in freeze protection measures for those. Having said that, it would be good to know, just because your ECWT is above 32 doesn't mean that in an extremely unlikely scenario that you couldn't have some, hours that fall below that. So having an understanding of where there might be some risk on that unit would probably be a good thing. But understood, if you're above 32, there's no expectation for you to put in freeze protection measures for those critical components.
Okay, thank you, Kenny. We haven't received any more questions at this time, so I'll just give it another moment and see if we get any more. Okay, we did get a question. With regards to the FERC directive on constraints and that it should provide auditable criteria, will NERC or the drafting team be providing or developing any guidance document for both registered entities as well as ERO CMEP staff so that there is consistency in terms of expectations on interpretations across the regional entities? I know from NERC perspective, they do develop RSOs for every standard, which helps with the audit worksheet. That will be coming from compliance at a timeline I cannot speak to.
And I can speak from the drafting team. The standard and the technical rationale that we provided is what we expect to provide as a drafting team. And we believe the standard as drafted does provide auditable criteria, and certainly additional examples or stuff that others will provide or best practices and other documents may help supplement that.
Okay, thank you, Kenny. I'll wait just another moment to see if we get any last questions. All right, another question. If my ECWT is above 32 degrees, what do I train on?
Yeah, you know, this is a tough one, and certainly the FERC directive required us to, um, you know, have all units in. And I'll give you an example that I've used at our entity. We don't allow interactive remote access, and it's a SIP requirement. But we could envision scenarios and extreme emergencies where we might need to do it. So we developed a document that said, in an emergency, if we were to have to do this, here are the compliance requirements. Here are the things we would have to do to make that, you know, compliant if we were to have to do that. So it's a what if document. And we provide that to our people, and they train on it. You know, this would be a similar type document for those entities in my mind. It's a what if. What if I did have an extreme enough condition that, you know, even though my ECWT is above 32, that I had freezing weather come into my area, and these units needed to operate for reliability of the grid. What would I look to do? You know, and then you could train on that document. So that's my answer. David, I don't know if you, I know this question's come up and it's come to you. Have you thought about it? Does that match your expectations?
Yeah, Kenny, I think you're correct for the most part. But just a reminder to the folks on the call, the requirement to have training is already a requirement in EOP 11-2, I believe it is. And we simply, as a drafting team, added the word annual in that requirement when we began this process. So I look back to try to see when that revision happened to EOP 11, were there questions or comments similar to that? I could not find any. So, but to the extent that you as a entity should have already had a training for your site, regardless of ECWT. I mean, we just simply said, hey, what have you done that you feel is compliant? You just need to do it on an annual basis. So, but back to your, I guess, thinking on what would be included. As you mentioned before, Kenny, the ECWT is kind of a, you know, not the worst case you'd expect. So back to the good utility practice and what you need to be, what you should be doing, hopefully, to be prepared for, you know, the extremes. Then maybe what you've said, I agree, is, you know, if we had a freezing event, what would I do? And at least gets your staff thinking about that if there would be a unique situation. And the number of entities, I think we had one or two different conversations on this. The number of you know, generating sites that would never experience freezing or few in the southern regions of the NERC footprint. So all that said, I agree with your answer, Kenny.
Yeah, thank you, David. And I'll mention the drafting team did reach out to some of the larger utilities that have some units that would fall under this criteria, and you know, kind of ask the question, you know, is this really overly onerous? And you know, how big of a administrative burden is this? And you know, generally the feedback we got was it was not overly onerous or an extreme administrative burden.
All right, thank you. We got one more question. Requirement 5 sets the training audience based on individuals that implement actionable items in the plan that meets the minimum requirements of R4. If I have no components and thus no maintenance activities under requirement 4, how do I identify a training audience?
I would train the general, you know, so, you know, going back to that what if scenario, if you have a unit that does not have an ECWT below 32, but could potentially experience freezing temperatures, The audience would be the maintenance and operations personnel of that union. So the people that would be responding to those extreme conditions if they got, more extreme than your ECWT. So that would be the audience, in my opinion.
All right, thank you, Kenny. We have not received any more questions at this time. So we can call the webinar complete. If you think of anything additional you would like to have the drafting team answer, please send me or any of the drafting team members an email, and we will do our best to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Allison. Thank you.